First and foremost, thanks so much, Nicholas. Thanks everyone for having me. Thanks for your patience. I know we had to reschedule this. I was stuck at Rochester Airport, rapidly losing my voice on the originally scheduled date. I am in much better shape now, and I promise you that you will get a much better version of this talk than you would have under other circumstances. So again, thank you for your flexibility. I really appreciate it. Um, The last time I was in Salt Lake City, my band played a show at Kilby Court, and then we got really, really good burgers at Hires Big H the next day. So I have very, very fond memories of the last time we were there. And I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but so yeah, Kilby is the best. We played there 3 times, I think, and it was always just an absolute highlight of every tour. Amazing space, amazing community, and then amazing burgers the next day. Who could ask for anything more? This is the gratuitous fancy slide with some of the companies I've worked for, some of the books I've written. Um, I am here talking to you about my new book, Impact First Product Teams, which is not the book I thought I would write. I don't think of myself as like a business impact person, as you may have guessed from what I said previously. I am a musician, so I thrive in the realm of the qualitative, but I think this is the book that folks have needed, and I'm really glad I was able to write it and share it with you. This is the version of this talk where I'm going to get right to the main points from the book. I'm going to share with you the highlights so that we have plenty of time to talk, because this is the best part of doing this is getting to answer your questions and hear from you and interact with folks out there doing product work, because it is not easy work. So the first and most important thing, and the reason I think this book is important and timely, is that the business you are working for expects some kind of return from the investment it has made in your team, even if it's telling you to just go build stuff. So even if the business is saying, go build this feature, go do this, go do that, at the end of the day, somebody, whether that's the CEO, the CFO, your director, your VP, somebody is going to look at your team and say, is this team worth the investment we're making? And unfortunately, they're not going to always answer that question um, in a way that works to your benefit. It's been rough out there, folks, and a lot of folks I know have been directly or indirectly impacted by this. When Spotify announced its major round of layoffs at the end of 2023, beginning of 2024, they said something that really struck me. Their CEO issued this statement and said, "Today we still have too many people dedicated to supporting work and even doing work around the work rather than contributing to opportunities with real impact." If you've ever worked on a platform team or on an operational team, this is scary stuff, right? Because a lot of us are doing work around the work because we've been told to do work around the work, because it's on strategy or it's part of an initiative. And to then have company leadership turn around and say the work you're doing doesn't have real impact, it doesn't feel terribly fair. It doesn't feel terribly just. But I think it speaks to one of the many uncomfortable realities of our work, the one that I'm hoping we can talk through today, which is that in theory, to bridge this gap between the day-to-day work we do and the business impact of that work, we have all these different steps that we walk through, right? The different VPs and execs and leadership committees put together where we have objectives, initiatives, strategies, bets, we do discovery, we do all this stuff. And in theory, this is supposed to align our day-to-day work with business impact. In practice, it's always messier than that, right? I've worked with a lot of organizations where they have a strategy that's like slightly misaligned with their bets, that's slightly misaligned with objectives, that's slightly misaligned with initiatives. And also, by the way, there are like 57 initiatives. So especially when we're working in bigger organizations, it can be really maddening to try to align these things. And it can leave us feeling like, as product people, we have to be able to make sense of all of these things and put them into harmony with each other to do our work. Um, in most cases, it can't be done, right? The most important thing for us to do is to draw a straight line between the work we're doing and why that work matters to the business. Regardless of how our organization does strategy, objectives, initiatives, whatever it does, the most successful, and as I'm going to say later, to my great surprise, the happiest product teams are the ones who can draw this line as directly as possible on their own terms without anybody necessarily asking them to. Unfortunately, most organizations are not actually set up to encourage and incentivize impactful work. So let me share a fun little thought exercise with you to illustrate why this is. I don't know if any of you happen to work in the automotive space. Let's imagine that we all do. Let's imagine that we are all working on a car. And I'm going to give you two options for what you can do. Number one, you can get your hands dirty and try to fine tune that engine. So you can try to get in there and make the engine hum, make that engine run beautifully. You might make the car run really smoothly. You might also stop the car from running at all. Your hands are going to get dirty. A lot of people are going to be pretty nervous having you in there, but you might actually improve the way that this vehicle does the most important thing it does, which is to get us from one place to another. Or option two, I will give you a bag of rhinestones and a glue gun, and you can bedazzle the heck out of this car. You are going to make this car beautiful. You are going to make it shine, and however it's running when you're done is going to be exactly how it was running when you started, right? You don't have to be an expert in how cars work. I don't even know how to drive a car, and I would have a good time doing this. And again, if the car's not running, that's not your fault, right? Someone else set up the engine. You just did something which you can point to, and everyone will look at it and say, wow, this car is so cool. You can say, my team did that. So I use this example because I think it illustrates how low impact work can also feel like low stakes and low risk work, right? If we choose to bedazzle the car, we're not going to stop it from running. We're not going to change the way the engine runs. The worst we could possibly do is make it look bad, but we can always undo that. And yet I am here to tell you that that is not the case. Low impact work accumulates and over time actually puts organizations into a pattern which I call the low impact death spiral. And nearly every organization I've worked with is in some version of this pattern. Let me walk you through how this works. It starts with product teams taking on low impact work, right? We choose to do low impact work because it'll do no harm, because we can celebrate it, we can point to it, we can say, look, my team did this, look at all the features we shipped, and we shipped them so quickly because we didn't have to coordinate, and we don't have to worry about executives being really, intense about the work we're doing because it probably isn't going to do any harm. But every time we do that, we contribute to more complicated products, right? Every fiddly little feature we build, every little bit of functionality and superficial change we make adds up to a more complicated product. And in fact, if you use literally any modern software product, you can usually feel this, right? That a lot of product teams have added a lot of little features, adding up to a product that feels more like a collection of little features than like an actual guided, cohesive experience. Again, in the moment, we can say, whatever, it's fine. Some people use the features. We buried them at the bottom of a hamburger menu. It's not going to do any harm. Who cares? Problem is that leaves us internally with more dependencies and conflicts to manage, right? When you have 25 product teams, all of whom have built small little features that have a series of slightly intertwining dependencies with each other, actually doing impactful, meaningful work becomes really, really hard, right? I've experienced this, and maybe some of you have as well, that when you're working in complicated, multifaceted products, doing something like changing the onboarding experience or changing the commercial heart of the product gets more and more and more difficult and challenging. To go back to our metaphor, it's easy to add so many rhinestones to the hood of the car that we can't actually lift it anymore. And when it comes time to fine tune the engine, it's actually more or less impossible to do that. So what happens as a result? More low impact work, right? We can't get to the high impact work, but we got to do something. So we do more low impact work and around and around and around it goes until the next round of layoffs. I have been in this cycle Most of the companies I work with are in this cycle. I have made it my professional mission to help organizations and product teams escape from this cycle. What's interesting is that many of these product organizations and teams don't recognize the cyclical nature or the root cause of this problem. They just see the symptoms. They just look and say, like, why do we have all these meetings to manage dependencies? We have to have a better dependency management system, or we need to reorg for better portfolio management. This is the one I see the most often. Organizations that say, we're bad at portfolio management. We need to reorg. We need to bring in program managers to work with our project managers and product managers. Or teams are doing work around the work, right? I worked with Mailchimp for 3 years leading up to their acquisition by Intuit. And it was my great pleasure to help them break out of this cycle. If you go to purchase a plan with Mailchimp right now, you will see this page and this button that says Buy Now. This button didn't used to say Buy Now. It used to say Add to Cart. There used to be a whole checkout system for buying potentially multiple plans when you signed up for Mailchimp. A lot of teams have put a lot of work into this, and getting folks to change it was really hard. It took one of the product managers at this company threatening to haunt her colleagues in their dreams to get folks to actually take on this work. Because taking on this work meant coordinating across a lot of different teams that had their own priorities. It meant inviting scrutiny from executives who suddenly had really strong opinions, right? What's this going to do? What about the customers who are checking out with multiple plans? What's going to happen to our revenue streams? All this important stuff. But they did it. And they did it in part because their CPO at the time, my friend Natalia Williams, actually focused them on a goal that really mattered. And tactically speaking, this is the biggest challenge I see for a lot of teams. Most teams have too many goals to drive real impact, and they're usually the wrong goals. In this particular case, Mailchimp's CPO said, look, I want to see this much more conversion happening. I want this many more people who get to the top of the funnel actually converting, paying, sending their first email. Once every product team was focused on that one high impact, high specificity goal, they had to work across some silos. They had to take some bigger swings. They had to do things that were not within their usual incentive structure. A while ago, I worked with a team that was responsible for rebuilding the B2B ad tech platform for a big retailer here in the UK. And I came to them with the same question I always ask any team I work with, which is, what goals are you working towards? What are the goals of this big relaunch? The company has obviously put a lot of resources behind this. This is important. What are we working towards? And they said, so glad you asked. We have a whole deck with all of our OKRs, like 50 OKRs. Okay, that's a lot of goals to work towards. And they said, no, sorry, don't worry. We actually also have a Miro board because we agreed that the OKRs were a little bit too fussy. So we went and did a whole other exercise where we set goals in a Miro board. I said, okay, so it's still up. Wait, sorry. We actually have two Miro boards because the first Miro board also had too many goals that we didn't think were the right ones. But we still kind of refer to that, and we still kind of refer to the deck. So we basically have 3 enormous documents full of goals. So I did with them what I do with many teams. We did a workshop, and I love this picture because you can tell I'm like really feeling myself here, and that guy to my right is not convinced at all by whatever I'm saying. This was taken at a conference in Lisbon in 2022 when I had just moved to London, and I was kind of like, yeah, smart workshop guy. Nope, not. Somebody wasn't buying it. But this workshop I did with this company here in the UK, we tried to really focus in on 1 or 2 goals that mattered most to the business. And the first goal that one person came up with was build an excellent, amazing, stupendous platform to increase our team's profits by 20% in the next financial year. Fair enough. Another person said, we need to build a seamless, wonderful platform to increase our team's profits from 20 million to 100 million pounds in the next financial year. Now, these look similar, but they're actually quite different because one of these is a 20% increase and the other is a 500% increase. So I asked the first person, where did you get 20% from? And they said, it feels right. Like 20% feels like a good investment. Cool. I asked the second person and they said, it's funny. I heard that first person say 20%, and that number 20, I remembered something. I remembered something from a town hall that our VP had, something about going from 20 to something else. And I looked it up, and they actually said, yeah, we need to go from 20 million to 100 million pounds in the next year. And I share this story in its entirety because it's easy to kind of mock that first person for being like 20%, I just made it up. But if they hadn't been brave enough to state a number first, then the team wouldn't have remembered that 20 and why that was important, and wouldn't have gotten to a point of realizing that sure enough, this was actually what was expected of them. Their VP had said in a town hall in front of the whole company, we are re-architecting this platform because we believe it can drive an increase in our yearly profits from 20 million pounds to 100 million. So people start to get a little nervous, right? They're like, this is a lot. But then they say, you know what? Don't worry. It's going to be fine. It's the next fiscal year. That's like 10 years from now. We got time. We don't have to worry about it too much. So I did something that I really enjoy doing. And I strongly encourage folks when you're stuck to just put stuff on a timeline. Don't sweat too much like what it is or put too complicated a taxonomy in place. Just start organizing information in time. So this is the UK, so fiscal years are a little funny, but we said like, oh, let's do March 25 to March 26, right? Let's say by the end of March 26, we want to have 100 million pounds in revenue, 80 million of which is new. What else should go on this timeline? Like, what are some other important dates, milestones, things to keep in mind? And somebody said, oh, well, we launched the new platform in October of 2025. That's the big launch. I said, okay, so what happens until then? Like, if we don't launch anything until October, how much profit do we actually bring in? And they said, I don't know, like 10 million-ish? Okay, cool. So that leaves us with 90 million-ish between October and March. That's scary. What's really interesting to me is that once the team realized this, they didn't give up. They didn't freak out. They started doing all of those things that best-in-class product companies are supposed to do. They started talking about doing more customer discovery to make sure that the demand was actually there. They started talking about looking at their funnel. How are we bringing people in? Can we get more people in at the top of the funnel? Can we convert more people into users before we launch this new thing? They said, why are we doing one massive relaunch in October? Are there other smaller things we can commercialize and ship in the shorter term to begin getting more of that increased revenue coming in? So again, I tell this story because the big unlock to get this team doing those things wasn't to like debate how much discovery is the right amount of discovery to do. It wasn't to change their operating model or argue incessantly about whether or not they're really product led. It was to have a goal that was clear and time bound and specific enough that they could actually align their efforts and so that they actually had that incentive to focus on higher impact work. So how do we get here? How do we have teams with three decks of goals that don't know what the business actually wants from them? And the answer, I think, comes from this image, which is from Christina Woodke's book, Radical Focus. Highly recommend this book. She likes my book. She blurred the back of my book, and I'm very excited about that. But in this book, there's a lot of really valuable stuff, but this particular idea really blew my mind, which is in most companies, we are very clever and we spend a lot of time cascading our goals from company goals to department goals to big team goals to small team goals. And at the end of the day, we have no idea if those individual team goals actually add up to what the company needs. What she proposes is that instead we think of company goals as a kind of center of gravity, and we have team goals orbiting around those company goals no more than one step. So that's no more than one mathematical operator, no more than one why statement. In the case of that company I worked with, that team was responsible for a profit goal that tied directly into the company's profit projections that were made to the public. Other teams I've worked with will, for example, talk about increasing customer lifetime value as a way to contribute to an overall profit goal, or increasing the number of users as a way to contribute to an overall growth goal. What's important is that every team have goals that are no more than one understandable step away from company goals. When I work directly coaching and consulting with product teams, which is one of my favorite things to do, one of the first things we usually do is we set team goals. Oops, I didn't animate this incorrectly. Sorry, everybody. You'll see what this QR code corresponds to in a moment. But I have a checklist that I work through with teams, right? Are our team goals no more than one step away from company level goals? Do our team goals involve specific enough timelines and targets to drive subtractive decision making? And finally, do our team goals contribute to company level goals enough to justify the company's investment in the team itself? I've had this QR code here because this checklist is available on my website. If you scan this QR code, it will take you to a landing page with more information about the book, resources from the book, and the opportunity to join my mailing list if you're so inclined. I will share this QR code again in my final slide, but I wanted to make sure I held it up here in case anybody was screen capping or frantically writing down these checklist items, because I do find them quite helpful. Okay, the last thing I'm going to share with you before I make room for your questions. The thing that surprised me the most when I was researching this book, because again, I come from music, you know, I'm not the person who is inclined to think of experiences in terms of numbers. The product teams that are having these conversations are actually the happiest ones I talk to. The product managers who are commercially minded are much less stressed out than the product managers who are really stressing about best practices. And I talked to these folks and I was like, why is this? This is really surprising to me. And I think it comes down to this. The folks who are focused on the commercials of the business are measuring their own success the same way the business is evaluating their success, right? They're not fighting against it. They're not saying like, the business doesn't understand. It's impossible for us to do product the right way. We have to become product led. We have to change the way we do everything. These are losing battles, folks. You know, I know we are in a world where a lot of our best practices are coming from like the same five Silicon Valley companies that are doing everything right, and we should all aspire to be more like them until you actually work for them or talk to people who've worked for them, and you find out a pretty different story. But if there's one thing I want to leave you with, it's that the very constraints that have people come into me saying, like, we can't do product the right way, we can't adopt a product operating model, we can't be product led because we're regulated, because we have quarterly projections we need to hit, because we're B2B. If you start to look at those commercial constraints not as impediments to doing your work, but as guiding forces that shape and focus your work, then you are going to be much happier doing that work. If you can give up on this idea that there exists somewhere this perfect 100% best practice driven ideal of product development and recognize that, like, yeah, this work is tough, this work is challenging, this work is shaped by the commercial realities of your business, not defeated by the commercial realities of your business, then that opens up a little more space for you to not be fighting a losing battle. For you to say, yeah, I can show up at work, try to make my company succeed on its own terms, and then go home and cook some bean soup and watch some trashy television and play some guitar and live my life a little bit. The first question I usually recommend people bring back to their teams is also in many ways the trickiest question. But gosh, I really love this question as a mindset shift. If you were the CEO of the company, would you fully fund this team? I like this question because, again, it aligns our perspective with the perspective of those who are deciding whether or not our team is a good investment, right? It says we as a team want to be able to speak to why we are worth investing in. And if we're not sure we're worth investing in, then we want to proactively manage that conversation rather than waiting for someone else to look at our team as a line item on a spreadsheet. This conversation is not an easy one. I've seen it play out a lot of different ways. I'm happy to share some stories with you if you'd like. But again, I promise you, you are better off having this conversation at the team level, having this conversation on your own terms, than waiting for someone else to have this conversation on your behalf.